Morning everybody. Well, hello, whatever time you're seeing this. Today I am going to be reviewing this book, The Mermaid of Black Conch by Monique Roffey, which recently won the Costa Award. So I'm just going to be talking about it generally and giving some of my thoughts on it. I'll probably also write up something on it later on this week and post it up on my blog. So you can go ahead and follow Simsy Marie. I'll link the blog in the description and you'll see that. You'll get the notification once I post up my written review. Because I'm very short on time with Alba, for those of you who don't know, Alba is my baby, I decided I would just talk and do the review while I actually cook Sunday lunch at the same time. So that way I could squeeze two things in at the same time. I'm supposed to be cooking macaroni pie, but Hassani went down to the shop last night to get the macaroni for me and he brought up spaghetti, so it's actually a spaghetti pie. So I didn't really know the difference. Anyway, into the review. So just to give you a general feedback on what, well, not feedback, an overview of what the book is about. It is based in the Caribbean, in this island that Roffey calls St. Constance. However, any of us who are Trinidadian can see little hints of Trinidad and Tobago because, of course, there's a small island where everything takes place in a village called Black Conch. And then there's a big island related to it. So, you know, it's kind of like Trinidad and Tobago, and it's taking place in Tobago. Also, I listened to an interview with Roffey, and she said that she got the idea to do the book. Well, The Mermaid came to her when she was at a fishing village in Tobago, and she would see the fishing competitions and so forth. So just an overview of what the book is about. There's this fishing village called Black Conch, and we have a fisherman called David, and he goes out to sea one day early in the morning. He tends to go out early. He's an early riser like me. And while he's there strumming on his guitar and singing some hymns, he sees a mermaid who comes out from the sea. And she's looking at him, but then she gets scared and she goes back. And a few days or weeks after, he keeps going back looking for her, and then she reappears. And we get the idea that whenever he comes, he will start to play the music and she will appear, and then and they kind of develop this relationship, which I guess they fall in love at first sight, if you believe in that. And but it's not actually love. It's only later on they both realize that probably that's when they started lusting for each other, loving each other, whatever. So then we have a fishing competition which comes up in the village, and we have two Americans, a father and a son, who come from Miami to, I don't think they're originally from Miami. I think they passed through Miami on the way. And they come to take part in the fishing competition. So the father is very much a macho man. So I guess through him, Roffey is trying to show toxic masculinity. And he wants to teach his son how to be a man, because his son likes poetry and books, and he says that his son's a sissy. So they come to Black Conch and they go out in the ocean to fish, and David follows them just to make sure that they don't catch his mermaid. But while he's out there, the mermaid, whose name is Akaya, she hears his boat engine and she's attracted to it. So even though he wanted to make sure that they did not catch her, he attracts her to the entire boat and they end up catching her. So that's a bit unfortunate. But he doesn't see that they catch her. He decides that, you know, it clicks later on in his head, oh, she might be attracted by a boat engine. So he goes back to the village, but by then it's too late because they've already hooked her. And then there's this massive struggle between her and the fishermen as they try to bring her in. So on the boat with the American fishermen, we also have three locals, three Black Conch men who are there helping the American guys to fish in. So they're like the crew. And they hook her, and there's this huge struggle, and she's so very strong. And they have this amazing part in the book where they see her for the first time and she leaps out of the ocean, and you see like her back arc with her hands behind, and her tail is so powerful, and it's really fantastic imagery. So we get to see how strong and powerful this mermaid is. And then they pull her in eventually after a long fight, and they so the Black Conch men feel like they've committed some sort of blasphemy because she reminds them all of their mother, their sister, different women in their lives. Even when David saw her for the first time, she reminded him, well, it's not that she reminded him, but he remembered his late mom who had already passed away, and he cried for his mom for the first time. So she really invokes this deep sort of empathy with the men, and they feel like they're doing something wrong. The American guys, on the other hand, the father and the son, especially the father, not so much the son, they just want to hook her in, bring her up. She's worth a lot of money, and that's all that's important. Also, they feel very sexually turned on by this mermaid, and I don't know if this is a normal thing or if it's just Roffey, but the American father feels the urge to pee on her because it's so tantalizing. I don't know. Maybe that's a thing. So they bring her in and they bring her back to Black Conch and they tie her up, and she's hanging upside down, and all the men, all the other fishermen, they gather and they look at her and they're all, you know, trying to examine her. One person tweaks her nipples, another person says that he's going to be the first person to ever F a mermaid before, and all of that. So it's really kind of, you know, gross the way the men are just objectifying her. And then David sees her hanging upside down, sorry. And he decides he's going to rescue her. So they all go to the bar to drink and celebrate. And while they're at the bar drinking and celebrating, he goes and he cuts her down and he carries her back home and he puts her in his bathtub. So originally his idea was that he would just carry her home, keep her overnight, and early the next morning he would release her. However, what he wasn't anticipating is that she slowly begins to transform back into a woman, because originally the whole thing, she's cursed. At this point, I should say that if you've never read the book before and you plan on reading the book, probably you should stop the video, go read the book and come back, because I find it very difficult to talk about this book in particular without giving away everything. But that being said, Roffey, from the beginning of the book, we realize that she's going to end back in the ocean. In the end, she, you know, throughout, because we have like little verses where the mermaid speaks and the mermaid is talking back and forth in time. So you could continue listening actually. So he carries her home and she starts to turn back into a woman. I say turn back into a woman because she was originally an indigenous woman, a Taino, I believe. So the Tainos were one of the Amerindians, the first people of the Caribbean. That was one of the tribes, and she was cursed by these other women because she was so young and fertile and beautiful, and all their husbands loved her. So they cursed her and they turned her into a mermaid. Goddess Jaguar turned her into a mermaid, and that was so that her sex would be sealed up in a tail, so she would not, their husbands wouldn't be able to lust after her, and she was exiled into the ocean forever. And now she's out of the ocean and she's turning back into a female, well, a woman. So David realizes that she's turning back into a woman, so he can't really go and drop her out. So we have this whole scene where she's living with David. Nobody else in the village knows that she's with David, and she slowly takes over David's entire house. She goes in his bed, well, he puts her in his bed, and she doesn't want him in bed with her, so she's upstairs and he's sleeping on a mattress on some pallets downstairs. And she defecates and she pees in a pail, and he has to clean up that pail. and she leaves little stuff on the bed. So everything, she's now trying to learn how to be a human. And of course, when she was a human before, they didn't have things like clothes and so on. So she's now learning that. She also has to learn how to walk again because she spent thousands of years with her tail, and her legs aren't strong enough. So she's learning to walk and so on. I forgot I was cooking. So we have that whole scene, and then eventually Miss Rain, who's this white woman that lives up in the hills. So she is a descendant of a plantation owner, and she lives on top of the hill that overlooks the whole of Black Conch, and she owns most of the land, so everybody has to pay her rent. She finds out that David is harboring a mermaid, well, an ex-mermaid, so she gets upset. Well, not upset, but at first she didn't believe that there was a mermaid because she heard this story about the mermaid, and she was saying, oh, that's just Nancy's story, that is the Americans and their mama guy. And then she realizes, oh, there really was a mermaid. So she decides to help David because she has a son, Reggie, who is deaf, and Reggie and the mermaid hit it off, and Reggie starts to teach the mermaid sign language. So she decides to help David with this mermaid. So she decides she's going to help him teach her sign language. Well, Reggie's teaching her sign language, and she teaches her Black Conch English, which is like, I guess, our Trini English. And she also teaches her standard English. And the mermaid Akaya, she starts to remember her own native language. So they are up in the hill and they're learning that. And however, David has a neighbor, probably one of my favorite characters because of how complicated she is. Well, not how complicated the character itself is, but that aspect of Roffey's book. So David has a neighbor, Priscilla, and Priscilla is, as Roffey describes, her born vex. So she vex. I think we all know Priscilla's. So she also has a thing for David, Priscilla, and she's jealous of this mermaid, Akaya, and her sons were actually some of the crew members that were on the ship with the pirogue, with the American guys. So they recognize Akaya as being the mermaid, and she's upset that David chooses this fish woman over her, and she decides to go to the policeman, Portos, who is also pretty corrupt and crooked, and they decide to try and, to recapture Akaya, and they contact the American fishermen, and they say they have the mermaid because they want, of course, money. They want the Americans to pay them the money. So David is telling them that, oh, she's not a mermaid anymore. She's turned back into a human. But truth be told, by this point, she started menstruating. And once she started menstruating, which meant she had fully retransformed from mermaid back to woman, she starts to transform back to the fish because of the curse that Goddess Jaguar put on her. So she's becoming a mermaid again. So they capture her, and then Miss Rain and the love of her life, that's the only way I could think about it, who is Reggie's father, Life, a black conch man, who initially left Miss Rain because he didn't want to be, and I put this in quotation marks, because this is how Roffey described it. He didn't want to be a house nigger because, of course, she's this white woman, a landowner, and he's a black man living there. So he left her and he abandoned Reggie while she was still pregnant with Reggie. But then he comes back at Reggie's 10th birthday, and he likes Akaya, and so he decides to help, and they help them escape. And then Reggie, Miss Rain, David, and Life all go on the night when this big hurricane, Rosamond, comes. Then the Rosamond hurricane is coming to actually reclaim Akaya, because it's the curse, so it's linked to the curse. So they send this hurricane to take her back out into the ocean. So when the hurricane comes, they go and they help release her into the ocean. So she's able to escape the American guys, and she swims back out. And then we're told she comes back every year because she has a friend who's a turtle, a leatherback turtle. So every year, who was also cursed with her is an old woman who was no longer fertile. So she was also cursed and sent out. And she goes back, and she comes back every year for the next 40 years to try to see David. and that's the whole book in a nutshell, right? I actually took longer than I had intended to, just given an overview of the book. But anyway, macaroni pie is in the oven. Well, spaghetti pie. So my thoughts on the book. So this book has a lot to say. My main interest in the book, my main themes of interest is the woman, how Roffey describes, and the whole idea of womanhood and what it is to be a woman. And I think she has very complicated views on that. And then the next thing too, more important than that, is a post-colonial look at the book, because I've been reading a lot of stuff on the book, and I noticed that, I don't know if it's just because it doesn't really click in the minds of the British people who have been talking about the book immediately, or you have to be from a post-colonial background to see it. But it's a very, very, very interesting theme, and it's very different from what we've seen, what Roffey does here. So let's jump in the post-colonial bit first. This is set in the 1970s. So for those of you who don't know, in the 1970s, although Roffey does mention it in the book, in the 1970s, in the Caribbean, particularly in Trinidad, well, I just know about Trinidad more because, of course, I'm Trinidadian. So there was the Black Power uprising. What was the Black Power uprising? Basically, so Trinidad, we got independence in 1962. And by the late 1960s, a lot of young Trinidadians realized that even though we had gained independence, nothing really had changed. We still had that whole colonial structure in place. And it was being upheld by this government that we voted for. Well, it was led by a black man, which is, you would think. Anyway, let me not get into my views on this. So they were upset about the fact that this government was upholding this colonial structure. And at the time, there was this whole wave of anti-imperialism, black power, which was sweeping the United States, and they decided that they would adopt that look. They would adopt that black consciousness, that black pride, that black power. And so what was born was what was called the Black Power movement. Now, a lot of people who were in the Black Power movement would say that, it's unfortunate they called it the Black Power movement because actually in Trinidad they had managed to get the East Indians and the blacks to unite. And I think that was one of the rallying calls, Black and Indians Unite, because the sugarcane workers, who were predominantly East Indian because of indentureship in Trinidad, they joined the entire movement and the marches and so on. So they marched into Port of Spain, that's the capital, and they took over the cathedral, the Roman Catholic Cathedral, which was like the bastion of white European dominance, and it lasted for a few days, but eventually the government got help from Venezuela and the United States, and they quelled the riots. But they had a real chance of a coup. So there was this kind of demand, because everything, even though we were independent, everything was still owned by a white population. I think one of the, I can't remember his name, but one of the main people for the NJC, NCJ, was that was like the main group that was leading the movement. He had said that, if you walk through the streets of Port of Spain, you'll think you're in Canada, because all the banks were Canadian. Everything that was economic was dominated by different white North American and European countries, and all our riches from whatever we produce was being exported out. So it was a lot of dissatisfaction with independence. So this takes place at this time where there's a lot of black pride. And of course we have Miss Rain, who is white, who is descendant of white, very strong people. I think her grandfather was a bishop or Anglican bishop or something like that. I can't remember the exact details. But she is a descendant of this, and therefore she owns most of Black Conch. And she feels really embarrassed about it, to be honest. So we have, of course, Roffey. We have to remember that Roffey is a white Trinidadian. So she will sympathize with white Trinidadians. So Miss Rain is not a character that you dislike. The reader is led to like Miss Rain because she was abandoned by life, the love of her life, who they were in love forever since they were children. And she is left to raise Reggie, their child, who is born deaf because she had measles when she was pregnant with Reggie. And she does a good job at it. So I think the only other white woman we've ever encountered in Caribbean literature, probably I'm wrong, but the only white woman that comes to my mind is Jean Rhys's Antoinette, who, for those of you who don't know about White Sargasso Sea, basically Charlotte Bronte wrote a book, Jane Eyre, and in the book we have this mad woman in the attic from the West Indies whose name is Antoinette, and we all feel like Antoinette is there to make Jane Eyre's life miserable and unhappy because Jane Eyre wants to marry this man, but he's already married to this crazy white woman in the attic. So Jean Rhys got upset with that, and she decided that she's a Dominican writer. She decided she was going to rewrite Antoinette's story, and we get Antoinette's story and why she actually ended up mad. And of course, everything is blamed on the Englishman. And I think Roffey, I'm not sure. I think Roffey got up, she doesn't like that idea of Antoinette as this vulnerable white woman, and all these things happen to Antoinette, and she's there as this victim, and she ends up locked up in the attic. Poor Antoinette. She creates Miss Rain as a very strong woman. So Miss Rain takes care of Reggie, even though he's deaf. She gets somebody to come to St. Constance and teach him sign language, and she is able to take care of him. She has a gun that she calls Barracuda, and she goes down. She thinks there's an intruder in her house one day, and she goes down to shoot the gun. She runs the American guys off her property when they come to talk to her. She's a very powerful character. So even though she's embarrassed about being white and her place up on that hill overlooking, she is not domineering. In fact, we learn that she gives away a lot of the land, or she sells it for near to nothing, etc. But the history still remains. She's white, and this is a time of black power, black pride. So there are characters in the novel that don't like Miss Rain. Like, for one, he's embarrassed that he's in love with Miss Rain. So he leaves out of embarrassment because he thinks, I'm a black man, I should not be with this white woman, living in this white house, which was created by blacks, but for them to dominate us. So he leaves. And then we have Priscilla, who is born Vex, as Roffey says. I just keep laughing because when I worked back home for a time, they had some people, they would say like they really have people like that who just always angry. And they would be like, why a Vex? Is Vex a Vex? So that's why Priscilla just makes me laugh. So Priscilla, they have a standoff in the book where Priscilla is going to make noise. Hold on. Yeah, so there's a standoff in the book between Priscilla. I love that scent when you first put in. It's cute. Priscilla and Miss Rain have a standoff, and Miss Rain basically tells her, get off my land. And Priscilla is like, your land? I didn't realize this is your land, but the animals are yours too. Everything is yours, And she confronts Miss Rain. Now, the only unfortunate thing I think about Priscilla is that we don't ever see her good side. Priscilla is just a bad character. In fact, Roffey says she's badness self. Okay, that's how she's described. as Barton herself. She's the outside woman for Porthos. She has a child for him. She doesn't tell him about the child. She bad mind. She tries to she gets the mermaid recaptured. She's a jealous woman. She doesn't like Miss Rain. She calls the Reggie a Dunsey child because he's deaf. She's just really portrayed as a very negative character. And I'm not so sure I agree with Roffey's portrayal like that, because, I mean, I feel that, well, first, I think it's brave of Roffey to do that as a white woman, to portray such a negative black character, because, of course, that opens her up for a lot of criticism of being racist. But aside from that, I feel like Priscilla at that time, if we take what was happening in Trinidad and the Caribbean, because it's not based in Trinidad, it's based in a fake Caribbean, a made-up Caribbean island, I feel like Priscilla has reason to be angry, because Miss Rain represents everything that was colonialism. She's white. She owns all the land. She has this house on top of the hill that overlooks everything. She is an educated woman, even though she speaks Black Conch language. We know she's a reader because she has bookshelves of books, and she comes out reading Derek Walcott and so on. So I feel like it is a bit unfair to Priscilla to just be vexed all the time. Even though we all know that they have Priscillas that are just vexed. I don't know, probably someday somebody, like Jean Rhys rewrote Antoinette, somebody will rewrite Priscilla's story. So that's that. And then they have Life, who is very proud to be black as well. And she's this horned woman. And he horns her. He goes with somebody in town who is town brown, as they say. Once again, I don't know if people would accuse Roffey of colorism or racism for that. Why did he go with a town brown and not a black person? So the only real positive black female we have in the book is probably Cece, who is related to Miss Rain, and she is also very strong like Miss Rain, and she's a positive influence. So that's interesting. Now, as I said before, Roffey is a white woman, a white Trinidadian. She is half British. I'm not sure, her mom is not Trinidadian, but Wikipedia is a bit vague as where exactly her mom is from. I read some of her memoir, Roffey's memoir, and I don't know if I didn't reach there yet, but it's never mentioned. I know her mom probably lives back in Trinidad, because in the memoir she goes back to Trinidad to stay with her mom after a breakup. But anyway, but she was born in Trinidad. She grew up to a certain point in Trinidad. I will call her Trinidadian, even though on the book I noticed they call her Trinidad-born British writer. You know, they like to claim everybody. But anyway, she was educated here from secondary school or something, so I guess they have right to claim that. So then this... what's interesting is that, going back to the Black Power movement, the novel ends in 1976 with Rosamond coming. Rosamond, as I mentioned before, is a hurricane which comes and sweeps Akaya back into the ocean. Now, in 1976, for my Trini viewers, you would remember that we gained republic. We became a republic. So that's the final snip of our colonial ties with England. So the Queen is no longer our head of state. We now have our own president. And I'm not sure if that is why Roffey put this in 1976, because, of course, this hurricane comes and it completely demolishes the island. And Miss Rain's house, towering house, which was a symbol of colonialism, is flattened, and Miss Rain is in the basement hiding from the hurricane, and she knows that she's not going to rebuild the house. She's going to just leave with life and live happily ever after. So I want to believe that Roffey picked this year 1976 precisely that we end all ties with the English monarch, and that we decide to be a republic, and everything is fresh and new. And even her son, Reggie is the child of this colonial past, because of course she is white, of white ancestry, and life is of black slavery ancestry, and Reggie is born, and like these Caribbean islands born out of colonialism, Reggie is a beautiful child. We all love Reggie. He listens to Bob Marley and the Wailers. Even though he is deaf, he can hear the bass, and he's a big fan of them. He's a very lovable child. He is instantly connected with Akaya, and so on. So we feel like Reggie, the reader feels like Reggie is going to fulfill his full potential, basically. So, but like these Caribbean islands, Reggie is also imperfect in that he's deaf. So our Caribbean islands, we have a lot of baggage. We are very imperfect, but we're beautiful, and I'm glad to see that Roffey thinks like that. And she obviously feels that we are all one day going to fulfill our true potential. So that's great. Yeah, so I'm not sure, as I said, I'm not sure if she chooses 1976 because of that, because of the independence. That could just be my Trinidadian interpretation of it. Now let's go to Akaya, who is the mermaid, our mermaid. I might be probably going on real heights here, as we say in Trinidad. But for those of you who've ever read psychoanalyst Carl Jung, you would know that he believed in the universal unconscious. This is something that we're all born with because of evolution, so we all connect on this plane of universal unconsciousness. And he had different archetypes. Archetypes are like ancestral memories. So a mermaid is one of these archetypes, okay? So something that we all connect with. It's something that we all know about. It's in a lot of folklore from different cultures. And my interpretation of the ocean and the mermaid Akaya is that the ocean is representative of our universal unconscious, because when the fishermen, when the Americans are there, they kind of feel overwhelmed by the ocean. You know, she's there, it's described as a female, and she is there vast, and they feel like it reflects their souls back towards them, and so on. And then coming back to the first time they catch Akaya, the mermaid, the way she leaps out of the ocean, I could just see it, you know, with her head flung back and her hands and all of that, and this power. I feel like that's the archetype rising up out of our universal unconscious. But Akaya is not your Ariel, Little Mermaid. If you've ever read Women Who Run with the Wolves, we have Clarissa Pinket Estes, who is also a psychoanalyst who believes in Jung, Carl Jung. And she wrote about the primal woman, this woman that is connected with, you know, she's not our airy-fairy Disney woman. She is a real woman. She's primal, she's strong. And I feel like Akaya is that primal woman archetype, who is strong, she's powerful, and she's real. So, you know, we have a part in the book when she starts back getting her cycles, and she takes the blood and she smells it, and it smells metallic. And very similarly, in Women Who Run with the Wolves, we have one of these little stories where we have a woman who's given birth, and the blood from after birth smells like iron. So, you know, the same scent of the blood, the real woman. Akaya smells bad sometimes. She smells of salt. When she opens her mouth, you could smell all the fish and so on. She defecates. She eats. She has to learn how to walk. She's described as not even really very physically pretty. She draws people to herself, but you know, she's not like your classic beauty like Ariel or any of our Disney princesses would be. So I see her as an archetype. And like all archetypes, I see that she appears to the people of Black Conch to tell them that change is coming. Usually when we dream, when Carl Jung and Clarissa, when Estes talks, they talk about people dreaming, and they have these dreams. In Trinidad, we'll say, you gotta go and play a number for playway, but they usually come to tell us a sign, all right, to tell us something. And I think she has come to tell people change is coming, because everybody she interacts with, she changes for the better. So David, who was just your regular guy before, now David becomes, he leaves kind of toxic. He's not your toxic masculinity kind of guy. He lets Akaya get comfortable. He lets her take over his whole house. He waits until she's ready to start a relationship with him. When he realizes he's scared off with all the talk about marriage, you see him contemplating, okay, probably, you know, I wouldn't talk about this marriage thing again, etc. He really lets Akaya find herself and be herself. When she meets Reggie, Reggie instantly connects. She's his first friend. So that is that connection as well. She also brings Life back. Life is also very much taken with her, and it's interesting to see that, you know, she goes with a hurricane. So we have that whole theme and idea of transformation continuing, where the hurricane demolishes everything, flattens everything, and we are waiting for a new black conch. I'll be imagining a new black conch will now rise up after this hurricane, in the aftermath. So when she leaves us, there will be something new. So that to me is Akaya's main purpose there as an archetype, to kind of warn us that change is coming. Also, a lot of people are intrigued with her eyes, and they are ancient eyes, because she spent thousands of years swimming the sea, the islands, and yet she's a young girl. She's described as being in her 20s, and then towards the end we see her when she's having her verse. She says she will live on even after all the water from the ocean has gone. She will live on. So we get that continuous idea that she is past, present, future, which also leads me to believe that she's an archetype, and the ocean is our universal unconsciousness, the people of the Caribbean. Also, because she's indigenous, she has been here before the Caribbean was rediscovered. So she is really there from the beginning of Caribbean times. So that's my take on Akaya. Again, I'm saying I could just be going on real heights. And then the last thing I want to talk about, I realize I'm talking way longer than I had planned, is the whole idea of womanhood. You know, I don't want to use the word female or femininity, but just the whole idea of woman. Roffey, I guess Roffey really nails it. It's complicated to be a woman, because the woman, we have women that we understand, and yet we have women that we hate in this book. And we realize for Akaya, who is this mermaid, she's really finding it hard to fit in with women, because she's this young girl. She loses her sisters all drown, and her mom, and she is alone with her dad, and all these men lust after her, but she doesn't want to get married, and her father, who of course just lost all his daughters, is not rushing to marry her off yet. So she is therefore banished. Ooh, hold on, I just have to put some water in this stew. She is therefore banished by the woman and sent to live an eternity in the ocean. And another person who's banished with her is the old lady, who is banished just for being old. I can't remember her name. It's with a G. But she is banished, and she becomes a leatherback turtle, and she is just banished because she's an old woman, basically. And she's no longer fertile, so they banish her. So they banish the young, very pretty, fertile girl, and they banish the old, unfertile girl. So basically, you can't win. And you hear when she comes back as a woman, they send, like, there are all these times where they would send rain for her, and it will rain fish, and they will be cackling up in the heavens, these women who cursed Akaya. And they really kind of reminded me of Macbeth's witches. You know, you could kind of imagine them up in heaven or around a cauldron, sending these curses and laughing and so on. So it's really kind of off-putting. And then, however, you have Miss Rain, who is a really lovely woman who's very maternal. She takes care of Reggie. She takes care of Life. She even offers, there's another guy who's kind of crazy, and she says, "Come, I'll give you work." So she's a really likable woman, and she is saying, you know, these women were real bad mind to have cursed this poor girl. And then we have Priscilla, who is born vexed, who is jealous of Akaya, who is vexed because David wants to be with Akaya rather than her, and who wants to get money off of her. So, you know, you're not too sure. I'm not too sure where Roffey stands with, I guess there's no sisterhood, or is there a sisterhood, or is it complicated, you can never trust? I don't know. That's interesting. I initially wanted to talk more about my thoughts on that, but it's just so complicated. I said, I'll leave that for somebody else. But it is interesting how she portrays women and the different relationships. And I think it's a very realistic portrayal, because it is difficult. I mean, we could be our best friends, but our worst enemies, women to other women. So it's interesting in that sense. I think that's basically everything I hope to speak about with the book. I am currently still cooking, so if it is you want to see the meal after, I'll post the picture up on the Instagram account, which is Simsy Marie Blogs. And as I said, later on this week, I mean, this video is here for you to see, and later on this week I'll probably type up, once Alba, my baby, gives me a chance, I'll type up the whole post-colonial theme and post it on the blog. So please subscribe so you'll get a notification when that comes up. And thank you. Talk to you all soon. Bye-bye.